It is absolutely amazing to see just the sheer panic in the streets right now. Many people are running.
A lot of people are walking over the Copper Bridge. They've not shifted.
Very, very good.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
On September 11th, 2001, 4 planes crashed within an hour and 15 minutes of one another.
Do we want to think about scrambling aircraft?
Oh, God, I don't know.
That's a decision somebody's going to have to make probably in the next 10 minutes.
Everybody just left the room.
I heard about the terrorist attack. I was in Florida. I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower. The TV was obviously on.
We have something that has happened here at the World Trade Center. We noticed flame and an awful lot of smoke from one of the towers of the World Trade Center. My heavens, this is just happened within
pouring out. This gas goes from one side of the building practically all the way to the other.
We had seen a...
And then 18 minutes later, at 9:03 Eastern Time, United Airlines Flight 175 slammed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center.
Here's another plane just flew into...
There is an explosion.
Explosion is incredible.
Both buildings of the World Trade Center are definitely on fire. There is black smoke.
And then at 9:43, it was reported that American Airlines Flight 77 had hit the Pentagon.
Meanwhile, it was beginning here in Washington. Another hijacked plane hits the Pentagon.
U.S. officials are saying there was no warning, no indicators of any kind of a likely terrorist attack. Number two, they say Pentagon officials within the intelligence and the counterterrorism offices are now looking at this very intensely. They obviously can't reach any firm conclusions at this point, but they say they had no warning.
10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, just collapsing on itself. This is a place where thousands of people work. We have no idea what caused this.
It sounded like gunfire, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
Explosions, 3 thuds, and turn around to see the building we just got out of, antenna tip over and fall in on itself.
At 10 o'clock Eastern Time, United Airlines Flight 93 crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
One of those cases where the pictures really do tell the story, that sort of the most horrifying aspect of this particular crash scene is how little debris is visible. There is a large crater in the ground, and I'm hoping that you all are seeing it as I'm talking about it.
We just saw that as well. The second tower, the only one that was standing, tower number 1, we saw some kind of explosion, a lot of smoke come out at the top of the tower, and then it collapsed down onto the streets below.
David Lee, what can you tell us?
John, just seconds ago there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the second World Trade Tower has just
I remember getting a call
collapsed.
from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. And the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
The official story is that Flight 77 dropped to within inches of cars as it made its final approach to the Pentagon. But how could anybody fly such a massive passenger plane so close to the ground at 400 miles per hour?
The following photos were taken before the outer wall of the Pentagon had collapsed. The only damage to the outer wall of the Pentagon is a single hole, approximately 16 feet in diameter. Are we supposed to believe that a Boeing 757, weighing almost 100 tons, disappeared into this hole without leaving any wreckage on the outside? But let's say that the fuselage of the plane caused this 16-foot hole. Why is there no damage where the wings, or the vertical stabilizer, or the engines would have slammed into the building? Why are the windows next to the hole completely intact? And as for the inside of the Pentagon, there's another hole, approximately 16 feet in diameter, found on the other side of the C-ring, 3 rings from the impact. For that hole to have been caused by Flight 77, the Boeing would have had to smash through 9 feet of steel-reinforced concrete.
Upon further inspection, we found that the damage at the Pentagon was completely and totally inconsistent with the damage of the planes that had hit the World Trade Center. I mean, after all, the planes that hit the Trade Center created a fire so intense that it fatigued the steel and collapsed the buildings, or so that's what we were told. And yet, when you look at the left side of the Pentagon, you'll note that there is very little, if any, smoke damage or heat damage at all. On the 3rd floor, it's very plain to see a file cabinet with a computer monitor. Neither of them are damaged. On the 2nd floor, you can see a wooden desk. It hasn't burned. And on the 1st floor, a very curious sight indeed, a wooden stool with a book that is laying and open. The pages aren't even singed.
Only a few scraps were found, such as this thin piece. Only one engine was found, and it was small. A Boeing 757 has 2 engines about 9 feet in diameter. How could such a large airplane with such large engines leave behind only a few small scraps?
Surveillance cameras from a nearby gas station and Sheraton Hotel would have captured the entire thing. Why was the FBI there within minutes to confiscate the tapes, including a warning for the employees not to discuss what they had seen? If the government wishes to prove once and for all that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon, all they would have to do is release one of those tapes. Instead, they would release 5 frames from a camera across the heliport, even though none of them show a Boeing 757.
How did Flight 77 get to the Pentagon? This is another suspicious aspect of the attack. The plane vanished from air traffic controllers near Ohio, as shown by the question mark. Air traffic controllers immediately called for help. Less than an hour later, an unidentified blip appears on the radar screen near the Pentagon. Supposedly, Flight 77 traveled all the way from Ohio to the Pentagon without any of the air traffic controllers noticing its blip on the radar screen, even though they were looking for it. The Air Force did not notice this plane either, even though the Pentagon is off limits to aircraft. If an aircraft as large as a 757 can travel hundreds of miles through American airspace without anybody noticing, what good is our air defense system and our air traffic control system? And consider that 3 other airplanes were also wandering around. Then consider that the planes entered restricted airspace. After they realized that Flight 77 disappeared, they should have been able to locate it with their radar. They had nearly an hour to find it. It should also have shown up on Air Force radar. Furthermore, how could the terrorists find the World Trade Center and the Pentagon without assistance from the air traffic controllers? This is the cockpit of a 757. How would they know where to fly? Would they use a compass and a map? How would they see below the clouds?
Pentagon tied up going into town, and I heard this plane come over my head. It was really low.
What size plane?
It sounded like a small plane.
I mean, it was like a cruise missile with wings. Went right there and slammed right into the Pentagon. Huge explosion, great ball of fire, smoke started billowing out.
If the load carrying capability is disturbed or destroyed in one area, within reason, it should be able to, the structure should be able to transfer the load from that point and carry it down to the foundation using a different path.
This photo shows both a rectangular core column and some square exterior columns. There were 236 of these square columns running up the exterior of each tower. Every floor was a mesh of steel trusses. There were 2 sets of trusses crisscrossing each other to form a rectangular grid. Corrugated steel pans were attached to the top of the trusses. Concrete was poured into these pans to form strong, flat, and fireproof floors. The exterior columns were spaced every meter along the outside of the towers. Windows were placed between the columns. The exterior columns were further strengthened with steel plates. The plates were welded to the columns and then bolted to one another. This grid of trusses was repeated every 12 feet. It is important to realize that the framework of these towers were 100% steel. This is a highly simplified cross-section of the tower. There were 47 rectangular columns in the center of the tower. There were 236 exterior columns. These exterior columns were literally on the outside of the building. According to the engineering sites that have technical data for these towers, the wind force that these towers had to withstand was greater than the force of those airplanes. Is jet fuel capable of creating some type of monster fire that destroys steel buildings?
After the impact, the North Tower stood for more than an hour, long enough for hundreds, perhaps thousands, to escape. The collapse, when it came, was caused by fire.
The maximum temperature hydrocarbons can reach in the atmosphere is about 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. However, that maximum temperature can be reached only when the hydrocarbons and the air are mixed in perfect proportions, such as a kitchen stove. Even though stoves reach the maximum possible temperature, they never shatter into pieces. So how could even lower temperatures cause the towers to disintegrate? Even if the fires were intense, fire does not shatter steel structures. The 32-story building in Madrid, Spain, is a good example. The fire became so intense that it spread from one floor to the next. This fire was much larger than the fire at the World Trade Center. However, the building remained standing, and it continued to support a large construction crane at the top.
The issue of the World Trade Center's collapse is at the crux of the story of September 11th. Kevin Ryan, an employee at Underwriters Laboratories, the company that certified the steel components that were used in the World Trade Center, sent a letter to Frank Gale of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, arguing that the steel used in the World Trade Center met all the standards for resistance against a fire. We know that the steel components were certified to ASTM E119. The time temperature curves from this standard require the samples to be exposed to temperatures around 2000 degrees Fahrenheit for several hours. I think we can all agree that even unfireproof steel will not melt until reaching red-hot temperatures of nearly 3000 degrees Fahrenheit. The contention that this steel did fall at temperatures around 250 degrees Celsius suggests that the majority of deaths on September 11th were due to a safety-related feature. That suggestion should be of great concern to my company. Days after writing this letter, Kevin Ryan was fired from his position.
We were told that the collapse began when one floor broke, and the pieces fell to the floor below it. Those pieces shattered that floor, and so on, all the way down. However, when the pieces hit the floor below, they will slow down slightly. Therefore, there should be a delay every time the pieces hit a floor. According to the scientists who analyzed the seismic data, the North Tower collapsed in about 8 seconds. The collapse started at about the 94th floor, near this woman. This means that 94 floors shattered at an average rate of about 10 floors per second. If this woman had tossed a steel beam off the edge, it would have hit the ground about 8 seconds later. The formula to figure this out is very simple, if we ignore air resistance. 94 floors at 12 feet per floor is 1,128 feet. Divide that by 16 and take the square root, and we get 8.4 seconds. This means that the North Tower collapsed as fast as objects fall when there is no air resistance. How can steel skyscrapers disintegrate so rapidly?
Out of the tower. Now this is tape, and you can see now whether that was an explosion or exactly what happened that caused that second tower to collapse. We cannot tell you.
Do you still think that jet fuel brought down the World Trade Center? In all the videos of the collapses, explosions can be seen bursting from the buildings 20 to 30 stories below the demolition wave. Here, 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 and here. Etienne Sarre was filming her documentary, WTC the First 24 Hours, and caught both collapses on tape. Watch carefully. The tripod shakes exactly 9 seconds before the tower begins collapsing, and a small piece of debris is knocked off of the right-hand side of the building. Not to mention this video of the second impact. An explosion is clearly seen bursting from the building more than 50 feet from the crash.
Managed implosion of the building. If you've seen many of the managed demolitions where they implode a building and they cause it essentially to fall vertically because they cause all of the vertical columns to fail simultaneously. That's exactly what it looks like, and that's what happened.
It was live on television. I mean, just literally millions of people.
We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated. They were planning to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running. Just ran
people out. Then there was those secondary explosions, and then the subsequent collapses. I don't know how many people were there. I know this.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
By May 2002, the World Trade Center had been cleaned up and all the rubble destroyed, so nobody could conduct any further investigations into how the buildings collapsed. The editor of Fire Engineering wrote months earlier that this destruction of rubble is illegal. He pointed out that our laws demand rubble be saved from major disasters so that we can learn what happened and improve our buildings and fire prevention techniques.
Later that evening at 5:30, World Trade Center 7 suddenly collapses. The building's tenants include the CIA, the Secret Service, and Rudy Giuliani's emergency bunker. And the SEC was using it to store 3,000 to 4,000 files related to numerous Wall Street investigations. The official explanation is that falling debris created an internal fire, which ignited several fuel tanks inside the building. If this is true, then it would be the third building in history to collapse because of a fire. The first two would be the Twin Towers.
Here's Tower 1 and 2. Obviously, you all know those were hit by jet aircraft. And then we have Building 7, the furthest away from all the other buildings. Building 7 was 47 stories tall. And this building that wasn't hit by a plane, that had no damage to it, collapsed symmetrically. Building 7 was a block away, where my hand is. But the red flashing square is where Bankers Trust still stands today. It had Tower 1 fall onto it, but just had light damage.
This photo shows the fires at 3 p.m. The fires are not easy to see because they are small. Nearby buildings and reflections make it difficult to figure out where Building 7 is, so I'll fade out the other buildings for a moment so that you can see Building 7 more clearly. There are only a few flames in only a few of the thousands of windows of this large building. Compared to other office fires, these are small. Why didn't the sprinkler system extinguish them? This photograph shows the rear of Building 7. This side of the building doesn't have many fires either. There are no fires anywhere along the base of the building. Despite the fact that the fires in Building 7 were so small that the sprinkler system should have extinguished them, at about 5:30 in the evening, the building suddenly crumbled into a pile of rubble. How did a few little fires cause Building 7 to crumble?
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it.
Larry Silverstein originally owned Building 7, and a few months before 9/11, he bought the entire complex, all 7 of the buildings, and then he took out a record insurance policy on them. This is a photo taken 1 second into Building 7's collapse. Notice the crimp. If we look at other controlled demolitions, we see that they first blow one of the central columns so the building falls in on itself. If you don't do this, the building falls outward and has a wider collapse radius and can damage surrounding structures. Seconds after 7 collapsed, this is what Dan Rather had to say about it.
Trade Center Building 7 has collapsed. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
We've all seen controlled demolitions on television. Office buildings, sports stadiums, all brought down by controlled charges. And these charges and controlled demolitions take weeks of planning. They have to bring in experts and do a structural analysis of the buildings, study which beams, which girders have to have charges placed on them, and then a team of explosive experts has to come and set the charges, wire them all together in sequence. And then, finally, after everything is clear, they let the building go, or pull it. Are we to believe that 8 hours after a surprise attack in New York City, they were able to pull Building 7? How is this possible had it not been planned in advance?
The events of 9/11 begin with aircraft going wildly off course. Incredibly, despite radar tracking for almost 2 hours, the whole of the mighty U.S. Air Force goes AWOL that morning. It's a mind-bending anomaly. Not a single U.S. Air Force interceptor turns a wheel until it's too late. There are no jets at all. It's a matter of historical record.
Standard operating procedures dictate that as soon as a plane flies off course, the FAA will contact the plane and try to ask them what is going on. If there is a problem or if they cannot establish radio contact, then immediately the FAA will contact the Pentagon, who will, within a matter of minutes, a maximum of 10 minutes normally, will scramble fighter jets to intercept the civilian plane and to analyze the situation and see what is going on.
You have Laura Brown of the FAA. She attends hearings of the 9/11 Commission that bear on the aviation aspects of the day. Embarrassed by previous non-forthcoming testimony about the FAA's role, She sends an email in May of 2003 to members of the media whose business cards she had collected. Within minutes after the first aircraft hit the World Trade Center, she states in her email, the FAA immediately established several phone bridges that included FAA field facilities, the FAA Command Center, FAA Headquarters, DOD, the Secret Service, and other government agencies. The U.S. Air Force liaison to the FAA immediately joined the FAA Headquarters phone bridge and established contact with NORAD on a separate line. The FAA shared real-time information on the phone bridges about the unfolding events, including information about loss of communication with aircraft, loss of transponder signals, unauthorized changes in course, and other actions being taken by all the flights of interest, including Flight 77.
This sort of direct violation of standard operating procedures is inconceivable without some kind of high-level government approval. If we try to explain it by using the incompetence theory, it doesn't make sense. For example, if it was incompetent, we would expect that there would have been a normal inquiry into what went wrong. We would have expected that there would be some kind of reprimands, that certain officials would be downgraded, or they would lose their jobs, or something would have happened to correct the situation. But we find that there has been no such reprimands at all.
The North American Aerospace Defense Command is charged with defending North America's airspace. On the morning of September 11, 2001, Vice President Dick Cheney was in control of NORAD. This was the first time in U.S. history that a president or vice president was in direct control of the military agency. NORAD was founded in 1957, and generals always had the power to shoot down or intercept hijacked aircraft. But on June 1st, 2001, just 3 months before 9/11, Dick Cheney ordered Donald Rumsfeld to allow him to take control of NORAD itself and the shoot-down procedure, and remove that power from the generals so they could do nothing. Here is a copy of the memorandum from Rumsfeld to the Joint Chiefs, telling them they no longer have any authority.
Take a closer look tonight at another example of where, despite the conventional wisdom, there were people in the United States who actually were preparing to defend against the kind of attacks which occurred here on 9/11. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD for short, has been defending the skies over the U.S. and Canada for almost 50 years, 46 to be precise. USA Today reports that in the 2 years before the attacks on September the 11th, NORAD conducted exercises using hijacked airliners as weapons. And one target was the World Trade Center.
We knew they hated us. But there was nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government, that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center.
Throughout the northeastern United States are many air bases. But that morning, no interceptors respond in a timely fashion to the highest alert situation. This includes the Andrews squadrons, which have the longest lead time and are 12 miles from the White House.
In the case of American Airlines Flight 77, which departed Dulles and was crashed into the Pentagon, the FAA lost contact at 8:50 a.m. However, fighters were not scrambled until 9:24 a.m., a delay of over 30 minutes.
Now, Andrews Air Force Base is a huge installation. It's home to Air Force One, the President's plane. It's home base for 2 combat-ready squadrons of jet interceptors, mandated to ensure the safety of the U.S. Capitol. Andrews is only 12 miles from the White House. On September 11th, the squadrons there are the 121st Fighter Squadron of the 113th Fighter Wing, equipped with F-16s, and the 321st Marine Fighter Attack Squadron of the 49th Marine Air Group Detachment A, equipped with FA-18s. This information was on the website of the base on September 11th. On September 12th, Andrews chose to update its website. I find it odd that after the update, there's no mention of the F-16 and F-18 fighters. The base becomes, according to the website, home to a transport squadron only. Yet at 6:30 the evening of September 11th, NBC Nightly News, along with many outlets, reported it was after the attack on the Pentagon that the Air Force then decided to scramble F-16s out of the D.C. National Guard Andrews Air Force Base to fly a protective cover over Washington, D.C. What is the reason for the failure of U.S. military jets to show up in a timely fashion on 9/11?
Well, the simple fact is, Barry, they didn't know where to go. The reason that they didn't know where to go was because a number of conflicting and overlapping war game exercises were taking place. One, with only 8 available fighter aircraft, and they have to be dispatched in pairs, they were dealing with as many as 22 possible hijacks on the day of 9/11, and they couldn't separate the war game exercises from the actual hijacks.
Hi, Boston Center, Team U. We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York. We need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not an exercise, not a test.
Now, the Commission imagines, page 35, that at 8:46, when Flight 11 hits the North Tower of the World Trade Center, neither the President or anyone, quote, in the White House or traveling with the President knew that Flight 11 had been hijacked at 8:14 that morning. Wrong. The Commission imagines, page 39, that as late as 9:30, quote, no one in the President's traveling party had any information that other aircraft were hijacked or missing. Wrong. The Commission imagines it can get away with such claims, even though millions of people saw TV news reports about the hijackings on CNN beginning at 8:48.
The 9/11 Commission published their report in July 2004. On the front cover, the report describes itself as the final report of the Commission. But many people complain that this final report is still not answering some of the important questions. One of those people is Senator Mark Dayton of Minnesota.
And the Commission testimony 20 months later covered up those truths. They lied to the American people, they lied to Congress, and they lied to your 9/11 Commission. NORAD issued an official chronology which stated that the FAA notified NORAD of the second hijacking at 8:43. Wrong. FAA notified NORAD of the third hijacking at 9:24, according to your report. Wrong. FAA notified NORAD of the fourth hijacking at an unspecified time, and that prior to the crash in Pennsylvania, Langley F-16 Combat Air Patrol planes were in place, remaining in place to protect Washington, D.C. All untrue.
The cover-up is as important as the crime.
There are, of course, 2 basic theories of 9/11. Both of them are conspiracy theories. One of them is the official conspiracy theory put out by the Bush administration, according to which the attacks were planned and carried out entirely by Al-Qaeda, inspired by Osama bin Laden. The other account, which is the alternative conspiracy theory, suggests that the attacks were made possible by the complicity of the Bush administration itself. But it is definitely not impartial as between these 2 theories. The Commission began its work simply by assuming the truth of the official theory. And it uses this theory to decide which events are relevant.
If the official story is true, the White House surely must be highly motivated to turn heaven and earth to investigate the events of that day as quickly and thoroughly as possible. That's how it's usually done. 6 days after the sinking of the Titanic, a chairman is appointed to head an investigation. 9 days after Pearl Harbor, the first of 4 investigative commissions is struck. The JFK assassination, the Challenger disaster, 7 days each. How many days after 9/11 is it that President Bush names someone to head an investigation?
This commission has been charged with a crucial task.
Call it foot dragging. Budget? In January 2003, the Bush administration allots the Commission $3 million. This compares to $5 million for a 1996 commission that looked into casino gambling, and $50 million each for the inquiries into the Columbia shuttle explosion and the Clintons' failed Whitewater deal. The dollar amount is later grudgingly raised but never exceeds $15 million.
We're also told in the preface that they intended their work to be independent and nonpartisan.
The White House chooses all the commissioners. Lynn calls them key insiders rife with conflicts of interest. The White House brazenly appoints as the executive director one Dr. Philip Zelikow, a right-wing Republican hawk deeply involved in the Bush circle, a member of the Bush-Cheney transition team, and a National Security Council advisor with Condoleezza Rice under Bush 1.
Now, why is this important? As director of the staff, he decided which lines of inquiry were worthy to be looked into, which subjects should be subject to research, and which ones should not. Therefore, as executive director, Zelikow could direct the staff to investigate those events that were relevant to the official conspiracy theory and simply ignore all events that would be supportive of the alternative conspiracy theory.
It's important to understand that the man who, according to the FBI, is considered to be the so-called money man behind the 9/11 terrorists. I'm talking about the head of Pakistan's military intelligence, Mohammed Ahmad.
In the aftermath of 9/11, the FBI confirmed that General Ahmed, then head of Pakistan's ISI, had authorized a $100,000 wire transfer to Muhammad Atta, the alleged ringleader of the terrorist hijackers.
Well, this same individual was on an official visit to Washington from the 4th to the 13th of September, and he met Colin Powell, Richard Armitage, George Tenet, his counterpart. Now, the question you have to ask yourself, if the money man behind 9/11 is in Washington meeting top officials and at the same time sending money to the terrorists, doesn't it sound, what is the proximity group of this individual from the sociological point of view? Okay, he has links with the terrorists, he has links with the Bush administration, he's buddy-buddy with George Tenet, he's buddy-buddy with Mohammed Atta. Does that not suggest that senior Bush officials should at least give us some answers of what they were doing with this guy?
In the 3 business days before the September 11th attack, some wealthy investors made suspicious investments in which they were betting that the price of United and American Airlines stock would drop in value. After the attack, they made millions of dollars profit. Many people assumed that those investors knew the attack was going to occur, and that they decided to take advantage of it. Who were those investors? Within days, government agencies in the United States and other nations began an international investigation to determine who those people were and whether they knew the attack was coming. That international investigation has been going on, and we're still waiting for their conclusion. Doesn't this imply that somebody stopped every one of those investigations? How could terrorists have the ability to stop such important investigations? And in several different countries.
The population doesn't know this because people like the Western media, the media in Canada and the United States, don't tell them.
So what about the hijackers? It's the funniest thing, but at least 9 of them are still alive. Walid al-Shari is a Saudi Airlines pilot in Casablanca, Morocco. Wael M. al-Shari is alive and well. Abdulaziz Al-Amari is a Saudi Airlines pilot living in Saudi Arabia. Mohand al-Shari is alive in Saudi Arabia. Khalid al-Madar is a computer programmer in Mecca. Salam al-Hamzi works at a chemical plant in Yanbo, Saudi Arabia. Saeed al-Ghamdi is training to be a pilot in Tunis. Ahmed al-Nami is an administrative supervisor for Saudi Airlines. And last but not least, Mohammed Atta's father claimed to receive a phone call from his son on September 12th.
Evacuation. And these people.
My son was ordered!
Let's ask a real question. Is that unfair? And what about the bunker? You didn't ask him about the bunker, the Office of Emergency Management bunker on fire?
We are getting ready for the next round.
Remember this. Your government funded and trained Al-Qaeda.
The Al-Qaeda network is considered by the CIA to be an intelligence asset, and intelligence assets are controlled by their sponsors. That does not, of course, mean that Al-Qaeda is necessarily pro-American. It means that Al-Qaeda is being used to perform certain functions for the U.S. intelligence apparatus. And it goes through a whole complex group of intermediaries.
If they do it, it's terrorism. If we do it, it's counterterrorism. That's a historical universal.
The FBI has gone public, as well as the CIA. They've even leaked the orders, like W199I, where George Bush ordered them to back off Osama bin Laden and his family. In fact, they even fired some agents that refused to follow their orders. There were red flags everywhere. Everyone knew that the attack was coming. That's why so many public officials didn't go to New York. But months before, there was the Bush administration frustrating the investigations, ordering the agents off the cases, ensuring that the attacks would go forward. Then there were the media reports by respected institutions, backed up by hospital officials at the American hospital in Dubai, Pakistan, of Osama bin Laden meeting with the CIA Middle East section chief for 10 days in July of 2001, months before September 11th. The question is, what was the CIA doing meeting with Osama bin Laden?
Howard Dean recently seemed to muse aloud whether you had advanced knowledge of 9/11. Do you agree or disagree with the RNC that this kind of rhetoric borders on political hate speech?
Yeah. There's time for politics. And, it's time for politics. And it's an absurd insinuation.
Who don't want the facts to be known, and for very good reasons. Because if people know the facts, they're not going to tolerate them. So therefore you have to prevent them from knowing. You have to indoctrinate them. You have to tell them stories.
What justification do we have for bombing Afghanistan? Oh, that's right. The Bin Laden confession tape. On December 14th, 2001, the government released a tape, allegedly of Bin Laden confessing to the attacks of September 11th, which they claim to find in a house in Kandahar, Afghanistan. Except there's a number of things wrong with this tape. 1. The tape itself is of very poor quality. And 2. The man in the video looks and acts nothing like Bin Laden. According to the FBI's website, Osama is left-handed. Yet, in this video, he's writing a note with his right hand. Not to mention, he's wearing a gold ring and watch, which is forbidden by Islamic law, and is also never mentioned in the FBI's description of him. Compare this video to 4 other pictures of Bin Laden. Does anybody else see a problem here? Until the government can prove without a shadow of a doubt that Al-Qaeda was behind September 11th, the American people have every reason to believe otherwise.
There are many evil forces in the world. If we want to stop atrocities, the easiest way to do it, simplest, is to stop participating in it. If we stop participating in it, we will already reduce the level of atrocities and violence enormously. And if we can ever reach the moral level, minimal moral level, of terminating our own massive participation in atrocities, then we can move to another question of what we do about the atrocities of others. It's the task of populations to free themselves from those kinds of controls and domination.